I stood frozen in my driveway, staring at the empty space where my prize-winning military Jeep should have been. In that moment, I knew exactly who was responsible: Karen, our power-hungry HOA president. What she didn't know was that I'd installed a hidden GPS tracker, and as I pulled out my phone, the blinking dot was already leading me straight to her house. Before we start the video, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like. My Saturday morning had started like any other. Coffee in hand, I stepped outside to check on my pride and joy, a meticulously restored 1944 Willys MB military Jeep. But instead of seeing its olive green finish gleaming in the morning sun, there was nothing but an empty patch of concrete and faint tire marks trailing down my driveway. My stomach dropped. The Jeep wasn't just any vehicle, it was a $40,000 restoration project I'd poured my heart and soul into for the past 2 years. More importantly, it was supposed to be featured in next weekend's Veterans Day parade. I scanned the street, looking for any sign of what happened, but the quiet suburban neighborhood revealed nothing. Then it hit me. This had Karen written all over it. Our HOA president had been threatening to have my eyesore removed for months now, each complaint more aggressive than the last. Without wasting another second, I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app. 3 months ago, I'd installed a small GPS tracker hidden under the Jeep's chassis, a precaution that seemed paranoid at the time but was now proving to be genius. The app loaded, and there it was, a small blinking icon showing my Jeep's current location, less than half a mile away. At Karen's house. I immediately dialed 911, explaining that my vehicle had been stolen and that I had GPS proof of its current location. The dispatcher assured me officers would meet me at the address. I jumped in my truck, heart pounding, and headed toward the confrontation I knew was coming. The Willys MB wasn't just metal and paint to me. My grandfather had driven one just like it across France after D-Day. When I found this rusted-out shell at a junkyard sale, I knew instantly I had to restore it, both as a tribute to him and as therapy for myself after my own military service. Every weekend for 2 years, I'd worked on that Jeep. Sourcing authentic parts, restoring the original engine, matching the exact olive drab paint used by the military in 1944. I'd even found period-correct canvas for the top. The restoration had won first place at the Military Vehicle Preservation Association show last summer. But more than the awards, it was what the Jeep represented, a living piece of history, a connection to my grandfather, and a reminder of service and sacrifice. And now Karen had taken it. My troubles with Karen began almost immediately after moving into Oakwood Estates 3 years ago. She ruled our HOA like a petty dictator, wielding the bylaws like a weapon against anyone who dared to cross her. My first offense? A garbage can left at the curb 6 hours past the allowed time frame. My second? Planting wildflowers instead of her approved list of acceptable vegetation. But the Jeep became her obsession. From the moment I brought the rusty shell home on a trailer, Karen made it her mission to get rid of it. First came the notices about inoperable vehicles being prohibited in driveways. I countered by showing it was registered and insured. Then she claimed the restoration work violated noise ordinances, though I only worked during permitted hours. When the Jeep was finally restored, she switched to complaints about its military appearance being inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetics. Last month, I caught her taking photos of the Jeep while standing in my driveway. That night, I ordered the GPS tracker. Something in her expression told me she was planning something drastic, and I wanted to be prepared. Now, as I drove toward her house, that preparation was about to pay off. The GPS signal led me to Willow Lane, where Karen's beige colonial sat behind a perfectly manicured lawn. I parked a few houses down and waited. Within minutes, a police cruiser pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out. I approached them, phone in hand. "That's my stolen vehicle," I said, pointing to where the GPS showed my Jeep's location. "It's behind that fence in her side yard." The officers looked skeptical until I showed them the tracking app, my vehicle registration, and photos of the Jeep that proved ownership. Their expressions changed from doubt to determination. "Wait here while we make contact," the taller officer said. From my position, I could see past Karen's pristine hedges to her side yard. There, partially covered by a blue tarp, was my Jeep. My blood boiled at the sight of it, hastily hidden as if it were garbage instead of a meticulously restored piece of history. Karen answered her door wearing tennis whites and a look of practiced indignation that quickly faltered when she saw the officers. Even from a distance, I could see her body language shift from confident to defensive. "Good morning, officers, what seems to be the problem?" Her voice carried across the quiet street, the forced pleasantness not quite hiding her nervousness. "Ma'am, we're investigating a stolen vehicle report. We have reason to believe the vehicle in question may be on your property," the officer explained. Karen's hand fluttered to her throat. "That's ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I don't steal cars." "Can you explain the military Jeep in your side yard?" the officer asked. "That?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "That's an abandoned vehicle that was violating our HOA regulations. As president, I have the authority to have nuisance vehicles removed." This was my cue. Despite the officer's instruction to wait, I couldn't stand by while Karen spun her lies. I approached, keeping my distance but making my presence known. "Officers, that Jeep is my registered vehicle that was parked in my locked driveway this morning. I have the title and registration right here." I held up the documents. "And as you can see on the tracking app, it was taken directly from my property to hers without my permission." Karen's face flushed red. "This is absurd. Thompson's vehicle is an eyesore that violates multiple HOA bylaws. I was simply enforcing our rules by having it removed to an appropriate location until he complies." "By towing it to your house?" the younger officer asked, his eyebrow raised. "That's not how HOA enforcement works, ma'am." "I was securing it temporarily," Karen stammered. "The towing company couldn't come until Monday." "Can I see the HOA documentation authorizing you to remove a vehicle from private property?" the taller officer asked. Karen's confidence wavered. "I don't have it with me right now, but as president, I have full authority." "Actually, you don't," I interrupted. HOA bylaws require a formal violation notice, a hearing, and a board vote before any vehicle can be removed. None of which happened. What did happen was theft. The officers exchanged glances. "Ma'am, we need to take a closer look at that vehicle to confirm it's the one in question." Karen looked like she wanted to refuse but knew she couldn't. "Fine, but this is harassment. I was performing my duties as HOA president." We followed her to the side yard where my Jeep sat, partially covered by the blue tarp. The officers pulled it away, revealing my beautiful restoration now smudged with fingerprints and dirt from its unauthorized journey. "That's definitely my vehicle," I confirmed, pointing out the distinct markings and the custom details that made it unmistakably mine. The taller officer inspected the Jeep carefully, then paused at the back. "Ma'am, can you explain why the license plate has been removed?" Karen's face went pale. "I don't know anything about that." "And why is there a screwdriver on the ground next to where it appears someone was attempting to remove the VIN plate?" the officer continued. All eyes turned to the tool lying in the dirt, obvious evidence of tampering. Karen took an involuntary step back. That's not mine. The gardener must have left it." The younger officer knelt down, examining the area where someone had clearly been trying to pry off the vehicle identification number, a classic move to make a stolen vehicle harder to identify. "Ma'am, this is concerning. We're going to need to take a look in your garage." "You can't do that without a warrant." Karen protested, her composure crumbling. "We can if we have probable cause to believe there's evidence of a crime," the officer explained calmly. "The attempted removal of a VIN gives us that cause." Karen's face twisted with rage and panic. "This is all his fault." She jabbed a finger at me. He's been a problem resident since he moved in with his junk military vehicle and his disregard for our community standards." As her voice rose to a shriek, neighbors began appearing on their porches, watching the drama unfold. Mrs. Peterson from next door approached cautiously. "Officers, is everything all right?" we heard shouting. The taller officer addressed her professionally. "We're investigating a vehicle theft, ma'am. Did you happen to see a military jeep being brought here this morning?" Mrs. Peterson looked confused, then her eyes widened. "Wait, you mean Alex's jeep? The one he restored?" She turned to Karen. "You took his jeep? After all that work he put into it? It violated our bylaws." Karen insisted, but her argument was weakening by the second. "Ma'am, we need to see your garage now," the officer repeated, more firmly this time. "Either voluntarily, or we can return with a warrant, but your vehicle will be impounded and searched either way." Karen seemed to realize she was cornered. With shaking hands, she led us to her garage and pressed the remote opener. As the door lifted, a collective gasp went up. Inside was what could only be described as a chop shop. License plates from at least 5 different vehicles hung on the wall. Parts were organized on shelves: radios, GPS systems, catalytic converters. In the corner sat boxes of registration papers and what looked like fake titles. The officers immediately radioed for backup. "Karen Wilson, you're under arrest for vehicle theft, possession of stolen property, and attempted VIN tampering," the taller officer announced, pulling out his handcuffs. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president." Karen shrieked as the officer recited her Miranda rights. "You can't do this to me. I was enforcing community standards." More police cars arrived as Karen continued her meltdown. Neighbors gathered at a safe distance, whispering in shocked tones as the reality of what their HOA president had been doing sank in. Mrs. Peterson approached me as Karen was being placed in the back of a patrol car, still shouting threats and accusations. "Alex, I'm so sorry," she said. "We all thought she was just overzealous about the rules. We had no idea." "Neither did I admitted, watching as Karen's perfectly constructed facade of respectability crumbled completely. "I just thought she had it in for my Jeep. She's been threatening several of us," another neighbor, Mr. Collins, joined in. "Last month she told me my shed violated code and would be demolished unless I paid a special assessment fee, cash only." More stories emerged as neighbors felt safe to speak up. Karen had been running a protection racket disguised as HOA enforcement, targeting those who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. Those who refused to pay her special assessments found themselves facing escalating harassment or, apparently, theft. A detective arrived to process the scene, and I finally received permission to reclaim my Jeep. The ignition had been damaged in the theft, but it was otherwise intact. After giving my official statement, I was allowed to have it towed back to my house. "Good thing you installed that tracker," the detective said as we watched the tow truck secure my Jeep. "We've had reports of vehicle thefts in the area but could never pin down a suspect. Looks like your HOA president has been busy." 3 days later, an emergency HOA meeting was called at the community center. The room was packed. Every homeowner wanted answers about the president who had been terrorizing them while secretly running a theft ring. The vice president, a retired accountant named Dave, called the meeting to order. "In light of recent events, we find ourselves in need of new leadership and a complete review of our HOA practices," he began. "Before we move forward, I believe Mr. Thompson has some information to share." I stood up, addressing my neighbors without the anger I'd carried for so long. "As many of you know, Karen was arrested after stealing my Jeep. What you may not know is that the GPS tracker I installed led police to discover she's been involved in vehicle theft across 3 counties. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The detective in charge of the case has informed me that Karen used her position as HOA president to identify valuable vehicles, create pretexts for having them removed as violations, and then either strip them for parts or ship them out of state with falsified papers. I explained how she had targeted specific residents for harassment, often those who owned valuable vehicles or who had challenged her authority. The pattern was clear now that we could see it. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was a criminal using the position as cover. Dave took over, outlining the board's plan moving forward: new leadership elections, a complete review of all HOA rules and enforcement procedures, and a commitment to transparency that had been sorely lacking under Karen's reign. "We also want to formally apologize to anyone who was unfairly targeted," Dave added. "Especially you, Alex. What happened to your Jeep was inexcusable, and we're grateful your foresight helped expose a much bigger problem." Over the following weeks, details of Karen's operation emerged through police reports and court proceedings. She had been running her vehicle theft ring for nearly 3 years, targeting high-value cars and military vehicles throughout the region. Her position as HOA president gave her the perfect cover. Who would suspect the neighborhood rule enforcer of being a criminal mastermind? The judge denied her bail, citing the organized nature of her crimes and evidence that she was planning to flee the country. The prosecutor informed me that my testimony and GPS evidence were central to their case, which now included multiple felony charges. My Jeep required some repairs after its ordeal, but by the time Veterans Day arrived, Valkyrie, as I'd named her, was back in pristine condition. That morning, I polished her olive green finish until it gleamed in the November sun, then drove to the parade gathering point. "Is this the famous Jeep that caught the car thief?" asked a fellow veteran as I parked in the staging area. News travels fast in military circles, and my story had apparently made the rounds. I nodded, patting Valkyrie's hood affectionately. She did her duty, just like her namesake. When our turn came in the parade, I had a special passenger, my friend's 10-year-old son, whose grandfather had served with mine. The boy waved enthusiastically to the crowd from the passenger seat, nearly bouncing with excitement as we drove the route. People cheered as we passed, not just for the military tribute the Jeep represented, but because many recognized it as the vehicle from the news story about the HOA president-turned-car thief. Someone had even made a sign: "Heroes come in many forms, some drive Jeeps with GPS." As we rounded the final corner of the parade route, I spotted some of my neighbors among the crowd, including Mrs. Peterson and Dave from the HOA board. They waved and cheered louder than anyone, a far cry from the suspicious glances and uneasy silence that had characterized our neighborhood under Karen's regime. The Oakwood Estates HOA has changed dramatically since Karen's arrest. Dave was elected president, and his first act was to simplify the bylaws to focus on actual community needs rather than control. The approved plants list was abolished, reasonable time frames replaced strict scheduling for trash cans, and vehicles were now evaluated on safety and function rather than subjective, aesthetic standards. My military Jeep sits proudly in my driveway these days, often drawing admiring visitors rather than complaint notices. Occasionally, someone will ask about the small bump under the chassis where the GPS tracker remains installed. "Just a precaution," I tell them with a smile. You never know when a little preparation might save more than just your vehicle. Karen eventually pled guilty to multiple felony charges, including grand theft auto, operating a criminal enterprise, and fraud. She'll be serving a minimum of 7 years in state prison, plenty of time to reflect on how her plan to tow away my eyesore led directly to her downfall. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways. In my case, it came in the form of a $40 GPS tracker hidden on a $40,000 military Jeep, and the satisfaction of watching a neighborhood bully discover that some rules, like those against stealing, actually do apply to everyone, even HOA presidents.